Continuing on further with more epithelium. What we're looking into now is more of the glandular epithelium. So we already went through the individual tissues. Now let's talk about the glands. Basically, a gland is going to be any grouping of cells together that makes and secretes an aqueous fluid. So that can be as simple as mucin, as we already talked about from the goblet cells, or they can get more complex. We'll get to those later. But they're classified in a couple different ways. We're classified as either endocrine or exocrine, classified either as unicellular or multicellular. So let's start off with the endocrine glands. We'll get to the exocrine in a second. The endocrine glands, well, actually the endocrine glands are going to be a whole system. But from our purposes, we're talking about endocrine glands as any ductless gland that produces hormones. Now, all of your endocrine system produces hormones, but we're looking at these as being ductless, which means they don't have connected ducts. They just use the bloodstream. They're secreting the hormones into your blood. That means they're going into the blood via exocytosis. Secrete the hormone, release it into the blood, allow the blood or the cardiovascular system to carry it throughout the entire body. These secretions, these hormones, they can be amino acid based, they can be more complex like protein based, they can be glycoproteins, they can even be steroids. So there isn't one particular type of secretion, but many different categories. We're not getting into that. That's more of an EP2 when you get into endocrine, the different types of secretions. For now, just know there are different types of secretions. They're all being produced by the endocrine glands. They are ductless, so they're going into the bloodstream. Exocrine glands. Now, the exocrine glands are much, much more numerous than the endocrine glands. Because goblet cells, that's an exocrine gland. And you can have dozens or hundreds of those in one single tissue section. So these exocrine glands are a lot more common. They can secrete onto the body surface, or they can secrete into body cavities. So things like sweat secrete onto your surface. But those goblet cells I keep mentioning, they secrete into the different body cavities. So you have your mucus, you have your sweat, you have your oil, salivary glands, pancreas secretion. There's tons of different exocrine gland secretions. Second differentiation was unicellular versus multicellular. Unicellular kept mentioning goblet. We talked about it. Well, sure, here it is. Goblet cell. Goblet cells produce mucin, basically mucus. These secretions are then propelled along the surface of that tissue. You have epithelial linings from your intestines, as well as your respiratory tracts, are going to be lined with mucus. In these cases, the mucus here is meant to help in the respiratory system trap particles that you're breathing in. Because the air you're inhaling, it's not usually sterile. Actually, it's pretty much never sterile, unless you have a special environment. So you're trying to trap those things and get rid of those particles so they don't just sit in your lungs. In the case of the intestinal, that's trying to help lubricate and allow things to slide through. So different purposes, but same basic idea. They're moving across the surface of those glands, of those organs. Multicellular, they get a bit more complex. From this section, you can see here that you have alveolar, you have tubular, and then they kind of mix together depending on how they look. So in the case of alveolar are one single. So here is an alveolar duct. One tube going down, that's it. So one single area. The bottom though, notice it kind of pops out. It forms more of a bulge, a large section. While in contrast, the tubular doesn't. Comes down and stays the same thickness. So alveolar comes down and can out for simple alveolar. Simple tubular comes down and stays the same thickness. Now, if we go to the simple branched alveolar, this one happens to have one indent, but then 3 branches coming off. You could have 4, could have 5, just the example. In the case of the tubular, we have the simple coiled tubular, kind of starts to make a spiral. Think of a snail shell and coil around. Or we have, just like the alveolar, the simple branched. 1 inlet, then branches coming off. It's showing 3 branches here, but that could be 4 or 5, whatever. So the idea of simple. Simple is 1 there. The bottom part, you notice, has compound. Compound, you have, again, 1 in, but then multiple branches coming out that then branch again. 1 in here, which goes to 3 branches, and then each one goes to 3 branches. So the idea of compound is it's branching, and then the branches branch again. The idea of compound alveolar. Alveolar, the ends round. Compound tubular, same idea. Branches are branching, but it's the same thickness on the way out. But we have a hybrid right in the middle, compound tubulo-alveolar. Well, tubulo-alveolar means both are present. You have the alveolar section and you have the tubular section. So you have a mixture of both shapes being present inside that one single gland. So there's really a lot of variation as far as how these multicellular glands are being structured. But it doesn't matter if it's multicellular, unicellular, but the key is how are they secreting? There's a couple different main ways of secretion. Merocrine is the first one we're looking at. In the case of merocrine secretion, notice how you have the individual vesicles coming out and they go through exocytosis. They release their contents by opening up the vesicle. The cell remains intact. So in the case of merocrine, looking at the pancreas, salivary glands, some sweat glands, they actually open up, releasing the contents of secretion. Apocrine is a little different. Notice how apocrine actually breaks off a whole chunk of the cell. By breaking off this chunk of the cell, it's actually releasing a portion of itself. The secretion for apocrine is a piece of the actual cell. You'll find this in the axillary and the genital sweat glands. Forms a little more of a viscous solution in this case because you have more of a solid component to it. It's a little bit thicker of a sweat. Apocrine. And then we have holocrine. In the case of holocrine, notice how the individual pieces are all breaking apart. But this cell, once it matures and starts to secrete, is going to end up dying because you simply just break it all apart. It all breaks apart, and the cell itself, those broken pieces, are the secretions. This is looking at for your sebaceous glands. Think sebaceous oil on your skin. Sebaceous glands. So we have merocrine, we have apocrine, we have holocrine types of secretions. Each one's a little bit different. From the merocrine, exocytosis, to the apocrine, portions are broken off, but it lives, to the holocrine, which the whole thing just breaks apart, and that is the secretion. So different types of secretion, different types of glands, from uni to multicellular. We have exocrine, we have endocrine. So a lot of different variation as far as how these epithelial-based glands are structurally built and how they function.